I was 22 years old when I started the internship at Meridian Capital Group, a private equity firm in Chicago with about 300 employees and $4.7 billion in assets under management. And I walked into that building on my first day believing that hard work and competence would be enough to earn respect in a professional environment. The internship was part of my MBA program, a 3-month rotation through the Finance Operations Department where I would be supporting the payroll and compensation team with administrative tasks, data entry, and process documentation. The role was described as an opportunity to learn how a sophisticated financial organization managed its internal operations, and I was told during the interview that high-performing interns were sometimes offered full-time positions after graduation. What they did not tell me was that the department was run by a woman named Veronica Hale, the director of finance operations, who had been with the company for 12 years and who treated interns as disposable labor rather than potential colleagues. Veronica was in her early 50s, wore designer suits that she made a point of mentioning cost more than most people's monthly rent, and had a management style that combined micromanagement with casual cruelty. She assigned me to a desk in the corner of the open office area, gave me a laptop that was 3 generations old and took 5 minutes to boot up, and told me that my primary responsibility would be to reconcile timesheets, process payroll adjustments, and handle administrative tasks that the full-time staff did not have time to complete. Then she handed me a stack of paper files and said that if I had any questions, I should figure it out myself because she did not have time to hold my hand. The humiliation started small and escalated over the course of the first month. Veronica would assign me tasks with incomplete instructions, then criticize me for not completing them correctly when I asked for clarification. She would schedule meetings without inviting me, then send me passive-aggressive emails afterward asking why I had not attended meetings I was never told about. She would review my work in front of the rest of the team, pointing out minor formatting errors or missed details in a tone that implied I was incompetent rather than simply learning a new system. And she made comments, always phrased as observations rather than direct insults, about my age, my appearance, and my background. She would say things like how interesting it was that MBA programs were accepting younger and younger students these days, or how interns from state schools often struggled with the level of precision required in finance operations, or how she hoped I was taking detailed notes because she would not have time to repeat herself. The comments were never quite actionable enough to report to HR, but they were designed to make me feel small, inexperienced, and out of place. And for the first few weeks, they worked. I questioned whether I belonged in that environment. I wondered if I had made a mistake accepting the internship. I considered quitting. What kept me from quitting was a combination of stubbornness and curiosity. I was stubborn because I refused to let Veronica define my capabilities, and I was curious because as I worked through the administrative tasks she assigned, I started noticing patterns in the payroll data that did not make sense. The company used a legacy payroll system that required manual data entry for certain types of compensation adjustments, bonuses, equity grants, expense reimbursements, and part of my job was to input those adjustments based on spreadsheets provided by department heads and approved by Veronica. I noticed that the approval process was inconsistent. Some adjustments were approved within hours, others sat in Veronica's queue for weeks. I noticed that certain employees received bonuses that were significantly higher than what the compensation guidelines suggested they should receive, while other employees in similar roles received nothing. I noticed that expense reimbursements for some staff were processed immediately, while others were delayed or denied for reasons that were not documented in the system. And I noticed that Veronica had administrative access to the payroll system that allowed her to make adjustments without secondary approval, a level of access that seemed unusual for someone in her role, given that the company had strict financial controls in place for everything else. I did not say anything. I was an intern. I had no standing to question how the finance operations director ran her department. But I started keeping a separate spreadsheet where I tracked the adjustments I was processing, noting the amounts, the approval dates, the employees involved, and any discrepancies I observed. I told myself I was doing it to learn the system better, to understand the patterns, to build skills that would help me in future roles. But the truth was that I was documenting something that felt wrong, and I did not yet know what I was going to do with that documentation. Over the next 6 weeks, the spreadsheet grew. I added columns for job titles, department affiliations, and reporting relationships. I cross-referenced the bonuses against the company's published compensation philosophy, which stated that performance bonuses were tied to individual performance reviews and company-wide profitability metrics. I pulled the company's org chart from the internal directory and mapped out who reported to whom, and I started to see a pattern that made my stomach turn. The employees who received the highest bonuses, the fastest expense reimbursements, and the most favorable compensation adjustments were almost exclusively people who reported directly to Veronica or who were part of her extended network within the company. The employees who were delayed, denied, or underpaid were disproportionately junior staff, administrative assistants, and people in departments that had no direct connection to Veronica's team. It was not random. It was systematic favoritism, and it had been happening for years. The turning point came in my 8th week when Veronica assigned me to process a batch of quarterly bonuses for the finance operations team. The bonuses were supposed to be based on a formula tied to departmental performance and individual contributions, and the total pool was fixed at a specific dollar amount that had been approved by the CFO. Veronica handed me the spreadsheet with the bonus allocations and told me to input them into the payroll system by the end of the day. I opened the spreadsheet and immediately saw that the numbers did not add up. The total bonuses allocated exceeded the approved pool by $47,000. I recalculated 3 times to make sure I was not making an error. I was not. Veronica had allocated bonuses to her direct reports that were significantly higher than the formula allowed, and she had covered the difference by reducing or eliminating bonuses for lower-level staff in other departments. I printed the spreadsheet, highlighted the discrepancy, and walked to Veronica's office to ask for clarification. She looked at the printout for approximately 5 seconds, then looked at me with an expression that was equal parts annoyance and contempt. She said the allocations were correct, that I clearly did not understand how discretionary bonuses worked, and that I should process the payments as instructed and stop wasting her time with questions that were above my pay grade. Then she told me to close the door on my way out. I did not process the payments. I went back to my desk, opened my personal email on my phone, and sent myself a copy of the spreadsheet along with the original approved bonus pool documentation that I had found in the shared drive. Then I processed the payments exactly as Veronica had instructed, because I knew that refusing would give her grounds to have me removed from the internship immediately, and because I needed to remain in place long enough to figure out what to do next. That night, I went home and expanded my tracking spreadsheet into a full analysis. I pulled 3 years of payroll adjustment data from the archives, data that I had access to because part of my job was to reconcile historical records, and I built a comprehensive picture of how Veronica had been manipulating compensation decisions. The pattern was consistent across every quarter. She inflated bonuses for her inner circle, redirected funds from approved budget pools, delayed or denied legitimate expense reimbursements for staff outside her network, and used her administrative access to make adjustments that bypassed the normal approval workflows. The total amount of money involved was approximately $340,000 over 3 years, and the impact on individual employees ranged from a few $100s in delayed reimbursements to tens of thousands of dollars in denied bonuses. I documented every transaction, every discrepancy, and every deviation from policy. Then I drafted a memo explaining what I had found, attached the supporting data, and saved it in an encrypted folder on my personal cloud drive. The next morning, I requested a meeting with the CFO. I did not go through Veronica. I did not ask for permission. I sent an email directly to the CFO's executive assistant, identified myself as an MBA intern in finance operations, and said I had discovered financial irregularities in the payroll system that required immediate attention. The assistant responded within 2 hours and scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon. Veronica found out about the meeting before I did. The executive assistant had apparently copied her on the confirmation email as a courtesy, and she called me into her office 30 minutes later. She did not sit down. She stood behind her desk with her arms crossed and asked me what I thought I was doing scheduling meetings with the CFO without her approval. I said I had found discrepancies in the payroll data that I believed needed to be escalated. She asked what kind of discrepancies. I said I would prefer to discuss them with the CFO first to ensure I was not misunderstanding the policies. Her face went red. She told me that I was an intern, that I had no authority to escalate anything, that I was clearly confused about how the organization worked, and that if I went forward with the meeting I would be terminated from the internship immediately, and she would personally ensure that I received a failing grade for the rotation. I looked at her, nodded slowly, and said I understood. Then I left her office, went back to my desk, and sent a second email to the CFO's assistant confirming that I would attend the meeting as scheduled. The meeting with the CFO happened the next day at 2:00 p.m. in a small conference room on the executive floor. The CFO was a man named David Brennan, late 40s, who had joined the company 2 years earlier from a Big Four accounting firm and who had a reputation for being detail-oriented and intolerant of financial irregularities. I brought printed copies of my analysis, the supporting data, and the memo I had drafted. I walked him through the findings methodically, the pattern of favoritism, the budget overruns, the unauthorized adjustments, and the total financial impact. I showed him specific examples where Veronica had redirected funds from approved pools to increase bonuses for her direct reports. I showed him expense reimbursements that had been delayed for months without justification. I showed him the quarterly bonus allocation that had exceeded the approved budget by $47,000. David asked questions. He asked how I had obtained the data. I explained that it was part of my assigned responsibilities to reconcile payroll records and that I had simply compiled the information systematically. He asked whether I had discussed the findings with Veronica. I said I had raised questions about specific transactions and had been told not to waste her time. He asked whether I understood the implications of what I was presenting. I said I understood that it appeared to be systematic favoritism and possible misappropriation of company funds, and that I believed it warranted a formal investigation. He thanked me, took the documents, and said he would follow up. The investigation started within 48 hours. David brought in the company's internal audit team and an external forensic accounting firm to review the payroll records, the approval workflows, and Veronica's administrative access logs. They interviewed employees who had been impacted by the delayed or denied payments. They reviewed the compensation policies and the budget approval processes, and they found everything I had documented, plus additional irregularities that I had not uncovered because they involved systems I did not have access to as an intern. The total amount of money that Veronica had redirected or misallocated over a 5-year period was approximately $680,000. Some of it had gone to inflated bonuses for her inner circle. Some of it had been used to fund discretionary spending that was never properly authorized. And some of it had simply disappeared into adjustments that could not be reconciled because Veronica had deleted the supporting documentation. The audit report was completed 3 weeks later, and it concluded that Veronica had violated multiple company policies, had breached her fiduciary duty as a finance operations leader, and had potentially committed fraud. She was terminated immediately. The company launched a remediation project to identify all employees who had been underpaid or denied compensation over the past 5 years, and they issued corrective payments totaling $680,000 plus interest. The project took 4 months to complete, and it required a complete overhaul of the payroll approval workflows and access controls to prevent similar issues in the future. I did not finish the internship. 2 weeks after the investigation started, David called me into his office and told me that the company wanted to offer me a full-time position as a financial analyst in the corporate finance department, reporting directly to him with a start date after I completed my MBA. He said the company valued integrity and analytical rigor, and that I had demonstrated both in a situation where most people would have stayed silent. He also said that the company would be providing me with a completion letter for my MBA program that documented my contributions during the internship and recommended me for academic credit. I accepted the offer. I completed my MBA, and I started the full-time role 6 months later. Veronica did not go quietly. She hired a lawyer and threatened to sue the company for wrongful termination, claiming that the investigation had been triggered by a disgruntled intern who did not understand corporate finance. The company settled with her for an undisclosed amount in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement and a release of all claims, but the damage to her reputation was permanent. She did not work in finance operations again. I stayed at Meridian Capital for 3 years after that. I worked on budgeting, financial planning, and process improvement projects. I built relationships with the employees who had been impacted by Veronica's favoritism, and I saw firsthand how the corrective payments changed their financial situations and restored their trust in the organization. And I never forgot the feeling of sitting in that corner desk as a 22-year-old intern, being told I was incompetent and inexperienced, while watching someone in a position of authority systematically cheat the people she was supposed to support. Veronica humiliated me because she believed I was powerless, because she assumed that an intern would never have the knowledge or the courage to challenge her, and because she had operated without accountability for so long that she believed she was untouchable. She was wrong. I had access to the data, I had the analytical skills to understand what the data meant, and I had the integrity to act on it, even when acting on it meant risking my internship, my academic credit, and my future career. The humiliated intern was running payroll. One click, one email to the CFO's assistant corrected years of injustice, and the system that Veronica had built to enrich herself and her inner circle collapsed under the weight of evidence that she never imagined anyone would compile.